Welcome to element 2 of this program. In this element, we're going to discuss how health and safety management systems work and what they look like. It's a continuation of element 1, and in element 1, we have looked at the foundations and the justification of managing health and safety at work. Here we're going to look at the practical procedures or systems that can be in place and can be used by employers in order to manage health and safety issues in their workplace. There are several benefits to having a health and safety management system in place, as you can see here on the screen. First of all, it demonstrates legal compliance with the local or international health and safety legislations. This creates a positive image for the organization and society, and even internally within the workforce, within the clients, within your contractors. It gives a positive impression about the organization, and that's always a plus for any organization. It also integrates health and safety with other management systems, for example, quality management systems, environmental management systems, making it much easier to manage all of these aspects of the system. And that's why you see in many organizations there's usually one management system comprising of health, safety, environment, and quality. Sometimes even going further up to include security as well, because all of these aspects are interrelated one way or the other. It also helps to address significant health and safety risks systematically. Risk assessments, for example, prioritizing controls and actions. It's always better and more efficient to manage any aspect of a system, of an organization, if we had a system in place. It makes it less random, and therefore it reduces the chances or risks of mistakes and misunderstandings. Similarly, it plans for emergency and manages the arrangements required for cases of emergency. And it also shows the management commitment to health and safety at all levels. So it demonstrates how the leadership is dedicated to managing health and safety, how much it is seen as a priority by the leadership. Of course, there are several challenges and common issues faced by organizations using health and safety management systems. One of the most common concerns and issues is that it is more concerned with paperwork rather than actual work conditions. So sometimes health and safety systems can become a paper exercise rather than an actual tool to manage health and safety on the ground. Of course, this can be solved in several ways: clear communication, monitoring, auditing, reviewing these systems on a regular basis, ensuring that your staff are competent, they are well trained, they are well guided. All of these aspects can help us to overcome that challenge. Another important factor or issue that we face is it involves too much documentation, and that can be costly in terms of time and effort. This can be managed nowadays with the use of software. So software using smart technologies, laptops, mobile phones, where emails are recorded, reports can be sent very conveniently, and there's always an archive to keep all of these required evidences and records in place. The other issue, which is really a health and safety issue in general, is that it clashes with other business objectives such as production and operation. And really, if we know anyone who works in health and safety, there's always a routine or a traditional fight, if we want to call it that, between two ends of the equation, which is health and safety and operations. In my opinion, this stems back to poor health and safety awareness, because both should work hand in hand, work in parallel, coming up with practical solutions that perhaps balances both aspects of the business. As we have seen earlier in element 1, there's a strong correlation between health and safety performance and profit in operation. So if we learn to balance both aspects, there really shouldn't be any challenge. And then it also, does the company conduct serious and effective performance review? Performance reviews are a tough exercise because it requires management, leadership to admit to their mistakes and limitations and shortcomings, and that's not always easy for several reasons. But that also highlights the importance of the review section of a health and safety management system. No system on earth is perfect. There are many changing variables around an organization. They could be legal, they could be technological, they could be internal from within the organization. They could be like activities, equipment, workforce that is different. All of these present new hazards which we need to address on a systematic and a regular basis. And that's why it's very, very important. It's an essential part of health and safety management system to go through a review process on a regular basis. Now, the common approach of all specifications or standards for health and safety management system includes the following points. Starts with planning. So, what is the view of this organization in terms of health and safety? What kind of strategy do we have in place in order to manage our risks? How serious is the level of risks, and how much are we ready to invest as leadership in order to manage those risks? The next point is do. So how are we going to apply all of these commitments, all of these ideas that we have in place? What systems are we going to have, and how are we going to implement them? Who's going to be responsible for what? What departments are we going to have? How many people are we going to have in the organization? What budgets are we going to specialize to each department? What is the role and responsibility, etc.? So this really is an essential part. This is the practical application of whatever we have in the plan, whatever we have recorded, whatever we intend to do as management, we're going to implement it in this step and set the scene really for our health and safety management system. The next step is an essential one, which is checking. So we monitor and audit our performance. This can be done through several ways, which we'll come to know in the upcoming videos, part 2 and part 3. But generally, monitoring takes into account proactive indicators, so things like inspections, risk assessments, communication, reporting of near misses, of hazards, etc. And also has a reactive aspect, which covers topics like accident and illness statistics, losses, financial losses from accidents, loss of business, legal implications or lawsuits, for example, against the organization. So we check before an accident happened or a harm happens, and then also after an incident or a harm happens, what has been done, what has caused it, how we can prevent it from happening again. And of course, the most important section, in my opinion, which is act, taking action to correct and measure and improve our system on a regular basis. If you are not taking corrective actions, the system really is not a system anymore. Because if we think of a system, it needs to be rotating. There's here a term that says continual improvement. Okay, so that's a vital part of any management system, not just in health and safety, even in businesses. We need to always improve and take corrective actions because, as discussed earlier, there are several variables that will affect our performance and health and safety, or as a business as a whole. So it's essential that we take corrective action on a regular basis and always improve our performance. This is going to be an ongoing process. It needs to be like a cycle, as we will see from the upcoming slides. One of the most important international bodies in managing health and safety is the ILO, International Labour Organization, sometimes referred to as International Labour Office. Okay? This organization has set the requirements for all member states, which are the majority of countries around the world. Oman, of course, is one of those members. Has set the requirements for all of these member states to have fair, safe, healthy work environments for workers. And here we quote some of the most important sections of ILO conventions in the year 2001. First quote reads, "The ILO has developed voluntary guidelines on occupational safety and health management systems which reflect the ILO values and instruments relevant to the protection of workers' safety and health." If you move on to the second quote, "The ILO has designed these guidelines as a practical tool for assisting organizations and competent institutions as means of achieving continual improvement in occupational safety and health performance." So most of the guidelines that you see, standards internationally and locally, one way or the other, they are based on the ILO Health and Safety Management System model. If you look at the graph here in the slide, you can see that the management system, the elements of the management system as per the ILO model, is very similar to the 4-part model that we have seen earlier. It also includes a policy section, which is the plan. So health and safety policy really includes the intent, statement of intents of management or leadership of that organization on what they are intending to do, what they are going to invest, what promises are they giving to their employees, to their visitors, to their contractors, to their clients, really, in terms of managing the health and safety of their workers. Then we'll move on to organization. In organization, we're going to highlight who does what, really. So, okay, we have this set of responsibilities. Who's going to be responsible for implementing each section? It's a teamwork at the end of the day. So, the most senior person, CEO, a managing director, an owner of or a client for a project will have the biggest share of responsibilities, but similarly, line managers, section heads, employees, contractors, visitors, manufacturers as well, all of these parties will have one way or the other responsibilities related to health and safety. Moving on to planning and implementation. Okay, so we have these roles. What systems, what tools are we providing to these people? Are we going to use a permit to work system? Are we going to have an emergency response plan? Are we going to use a risk assessment template? Are we going to have a training matrix related to health and safety? What tools are we going to use and how are we going to implement it? Moving on to the next point, which is evaluating. And really, evaluation and auditing, they're somewhat similar, but evaluation perhaps is more generic. So evaluate perhaps the satisfaction of our customers, satisfaction of our employees, whether there are complaints, whether there is an increased level of a particular type of accidents or injuries, for example, an illness that has become suddenly more common among our staff. And we're also moving into auditing. Auditing is more particular on comparing whatever we have documented in our management system, particularly in our policy, and what evidence we have in reality in the organization that shows that we have actually committed and implemented these statements in reality in the workplace. So really, auditing is a process of looking at our management system and checking whether we are actually implementing whatever we have committed ourselves into in the policy or in the planning stage. And finally, last but not least, definitely, is action for improvement. So this section really takes into account looking back at all of these previous sections that we have mentioned earlier and learning from whatever limitations we have. Maybe sometimes we're doing too much. There is unnecessary procedures, there is unnecessary effort that can be invested and can become more efficient if used otherwise. So action for improvement does not mean necessarily that we have to do more. Perhaps we have to do things differently, or maybe we have to relax a little bit on a few things and focus on other priorities that we have in the organization. Moving on to one of the most successful so far examples of a health and safety management system model, which is ISO 45001. You can see here on the screen. ISO 45001, the title is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. The clauses of 45001, which was issued in the year 2018 and has become widely popular and accepted, and a lot of employers and business owners are very keen to have the ISO system in their organization because of how common it has become for businesses. So the contents or the clauses, first of all, starts with the scope, references, definitions, context of the organization. Here we highlight what type of organization, what kind of industry we have, what size of organization we have, leadership. Okay, so what kind of leadership responsibilities we have, what actions and systems we have in place for the senior management. Planning, which is very similar to the ILO standard that you have looked at earlier. The support that is provided to our line managers, to our staff, and anyone else who might be affected by our operations. What kind of operation we have, what kind of activity we are using, equipment, machinery, activities. And then performance evaluation or performance review, so corrective actions. And then finally, improvements. Okay, so how can we improve all of these sections, whether we have limitations or whenever there is an issue experienced. The beauty of this standard and why it has become widely popular is that it focuses a lot on leadership, which is really the heart of managing health and safety in a workplace. Leadership often leads by example. So if leadership shows, organization leadership shows a lot of commitment and discipline towards health and safety, everyone else will follow, lead, really. And that's why really this has proven to be one of the most successful models for health and safety management systems. Of course, you will see a graph that summarizes all of the sections that we have discussed earlier. ISO 45001 it has allowed organizations to be certified and also to become trained as internal or external auditors, which is an area of interest for occupational health and safety practitioners. Now, in terms of planning, which is part of the policy section that we see here, it's very important to ensure that the health and safety objectives that we have set for our organization are SMART. The SMART concept has become widely associated with management of different topics, businesses, quality, etc. And it's applicable to different aspects as well. So the S stands for specific. We need to set clear objectives, and we need to understand, make sure others understand what objectives we have it's clearly understood by those people. Similarly, it needs to be measurable, okay? So this will allow us to ensure that the actions are completed, there's an evidence for completing and implementing those objectives. Similarly, it needs to be achievable, so within the capabilities and resources we have in our organizations, it needs to be kind of realistic, which takes us to the next point. It needs to be possible to perform within the job nature, within the industry standards, within the legal requirements, within technological solutions that we have. It needs to be as realistic and practical as possible. And finally, it needs to be timely. We need to set deadlines, because in organizations and businesses, time is money, as we always say. So we need to set deadlines in order to ensure that by a certain time, we're going to have, in fact, implementation of whatever objective we have. And we also need to set a review date to ensure that whatever systems or solutions we have created or suggested is actually being implemented and being used properly. Of course, both short and long-term objectives need to be set. That is going to depend on the size of the organization. If you're a small organization, really, there is no need for detailed or complex long-term objectives. It's much easier to manage. However, if you are a larger organization, corporation with tens of contractors and subcontractors and several activities ongoing, high-risk industries, for example, a short-term objective can refer to an HSE plan on an annual basis, for example, while a long-term objective can indicate perhaps objectives or plans going on for 5 years, for example. So the size of the organization and level of risk is going to affect what kind effects on the decision making, really, of what kind of plan we'll need to have in place. Now, talking about planning, the most important part of a health and safety management system really is health and safety policy. Generally, health and safety policies include, first of all, the statement of intent. Statement of intents, I don't know if anyone has seen health and safety policy before, but the statement of intent usually is the part of a policy that you see at the entrance of the organization. And this is where the leadership or the management will showcase and demonstrate their concern and their commitment to manage health and safety of their visitors, of their employees, of their contractors, etc. So for example, we have a broad term here, which is we aim to get everyone home safely and healthily daily. It demonstrates senior management commitment to health and safety. Usually, as we mentioned, it is placed in a visible and prominent part of the organization, usually in an entrance, for example. And then it is often signed by the most senior person in the organization, whether it's a CEO, a managing director, because that highlights and demonstrates how serious this document is, that the management is responsible for this, and this is like an evidence really that showcases how serious health and safety management is to this organization. Okay? It's also important to have a date on this document to ensure that it's current. It needs to be reviewed on a regular basis, as we will see in the upcoming slides, but having a date that is current or that is relevant will also give it much more value to the reader. Of course, who should write a health and safety policy? It could be internally if we had within the organization the skill, the competence, and the experience required. But there is absolutely no problem if we use external resources with consultants or specialists to help in writing or establishing health and safety policy. However, we need to always make sure that there is a team. So it's not just an external person who's not really knowledgeable of the nature of our work, but we need to have a team from within the organization as well to oversee and participate really in this process. In some occasions, when we have a large organization, we have various activities and departments, we might end up having individual department policies, but that's not very common, except if it's like an extreme rare situation where this might be required. Now, in terms of responsibilities of personnel, or the organization section, which we mentioned before, here we're going to set who does what, okay? So it defines the names, the positions, duties of staff within health and safety responsibilities, and it defines the reporting lines. So in case something goes wrong, in case there's an emergency, staff or employees really know where to communicate and who is responsible for what. This will make it much easier to manage such scenarios. So the personnel, of course, cover all levels in the organization. It starts with the directors, senior management staff, CEOs and managing directors, as we mentioned earlier. Staff at this level usually have higher power, and therefore they have bigger responsibilities, and they need to contribute to health and safety in different situations. We also have line managers and supervisors, for example, department heads, section heads, health and safety advisors. It's important here to note that contrary to what we hear a lot, especially in this part of the world where health and safety is entirely the responsibility of the health and safety management system, it is unacceptable. It's teamwork. And the role of a health and safety manager or department really is to give advice and help in implementing the health and safety management system, but it's not a one-man show. If it's a one-man show, then we don't have a system. Okay? So the responsibilities need to be shared at different levels, as we can see here on the slide. It is not just the responsibility of a health and safety department. That's a common idea, and it's a very unrealistic one, really. So health and safety advisors, as we mentioned, there could be others depending on what type of organization we have. If we have hired an occupational nurse, technicians, industrial hygienists, for example, which might be relevant. Health and safety representatives, if we have health and safety committees, for example, if there's a need for it. Employees and fire wardens, fire marshals and first aiders. We need to focus here on line managers as well, because different lines or departments, so to speak, have different responsibilities in health and safety which might not occur to us. So training department, for example, will be in charge of designating or establishing health and safety training needs depending on the level and department where the employee is working. Finance, for example, will need to have the suitable budget to health and safety resources. Now, the responsibilities of management can include topics like accident investigation or participating in these processes, health and safety training, information, health and safety monitoring and auditing, health surveillance reports, particularly HR, for example, risk assessment and equipment maintenance if we have a maintenance department, liaison with external agencies, particularly media and social media, and then management of employees' safety committees if we had something like that in the organization. And that also highlights the importance of having job descriptions. All of these requirements would probably be mentioned, ideally really, in a job description.